The Pope and Young Club wants to welcome you as we rally together to ensure our bow hunting opportunities for today and tomorrow. You've come to the podcast that believes in preserving, protecting, and promoting the passion for bow hunting. Join us as we strive to be the voice of today's bow hunter. This is the Pope and Young Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pope and Young Podcast. This is Jason Rounsville. I'm joined today with my co-host Dylan Ray, and we have a man that is we're super excited to have on, and a man that needs absolutely no introduction. We have Chuck Adams with us today, and Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
This is Dylan and I have done, I'm not sure, we've got to be pushing 40 or 50 of these so far. And we've had some pretty big names on here, but I've got to tell you, this is the one that we both were a little bit anxious for. We're like, oh my gosh, we're talking with Chuck Adams. This is crazy. So we appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, believe me.
Yeah. Now I'm going to go right back and say, tell us about your first, you're an icon in the bow hunting world, an absolute icon. And so what was it originally that brought you to bow hunting, that made you pick up a bow and say, hey, this is where it's at for me?
Well, Jason and I grew up in a hunting family. Both my grandfathers were gun hunters. My dad was a gun hunter. And I grew up in California, where if I was really lucky, I had 2 deer tags a year. So as a young man, I was able to start deer hunting with a gun when I was 12 years old. As a young man, I would dream about hunting deer all year long. And my grandfathers and my dad knew some great spots, and it was over too quickly for me. And I quickly realized that I wanted to hunt more and kill less when I only had 1 or 2 deer tags a year. So the very next year, when I was 13, I bought an old Ben Pearson Hunter recurve bow at the local hardware store and started shooting Herder's aluminum arrows. And I loved it. And took me 3 years to shoot my first deer with a bow in California. But I never looked back. And to this day, I'm the only bow hunter in my family. My dad was a gun nut.
Really?
And he's been gone a few years now. But I tried to get him to bow hunt, and he told me finally, he said, I don't want to run the risk of not having a gun tag in California, so I'm not going to try bow hunting anymore. But bow hunting was it for me after that.
Wow. And I mean, just for me, I can remember back, I wish I could find it. And it's possible I may actually still have that magazine somewhere. But I remember years ago, there was and I don't remember what magazine was in, but one of the major outdoor publications. And here's a picture of you with your bow, and you had 4 or 5 mule deer, mounts behind you. And at that point in time, I mean, the smallest of those deer was bigger than anything, I haven't hunted since I was in deer camp at a month old. I was born in August, and September I was in deer camp. So, I mean, I've been around this a long time. The smallest buck you had in that picture was bigger than anything I'd ever even seen. I mean, even the ones you see running 300 yards over the hill, going way back, that was, I mean, just truly one of those iconic pictures I can still see, even decades later. So it's, I mean, obviously you had success with a bow, took you 2 years to get the first one. How long when were you at that point where you started saying, hey, I have a real shot at getting these true giants?
Well, like most folks, Jason, I started out just hoping I would see an arrow go into an animal. And for a while, I didn't think that ever was going to happen. And California, where I started, the little black-tailed deer were really difficult. the success rate for bow hunters when I started was about 3%, believe it or not. And it's not much higher now than that. But I started out shooting the first legal fork-horn buck I could get. And I just progressed like most bow hunters who like trophies. It was all about the challenge for me. And after a while, I thought it's the same thread that I mentioned a while back. I wanted to hunt more and kill less. And so once I felt I was adept at shooting the smaller animals, I started passing up smaller animals. So I still had my tag in my pocket and I could hunt some more.
Yeah.
And I suppose the first Pope and young deer I ever shot was in my early 20s in California. And then I branched out and shot a nice moose in the 1970s in British Columbia, Canada. And I just loved having that tag in my pocket for as long as I could. And that's the reason that I trophy hunt to this day.
Wow. And that's one of the fundamental differences. I have a good buddy of mine who he was actually Dave Cena, and he exposed me to Pope and Young when we were in college years ago. And we talk about that, the fundamental difference. Like my highlight of my season is when I get to punch a tag. And that's for him. He says, oh, that's kind of a downer. He says it's a highlight, but it's also a downer because now I'm done hunting for the season. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
Well, there are a whole bunch of different reasons people hunt trophy animals. Some of them I consider to be the right reasons, and some of them are very wrong reasons. But for me, it's always been the challenge and wanting to extend my season. And I feel that's one of the right reasons to trophy hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what do you see out there where guys are doing it for the wrong reasons? What would you consider those to be?
Well, I think it's the wrong reason to trophy hunt just to put an animal on the wall and brag about it later. I just don't think that's a ethical and moral way to do it. If that's your only reason, because that spawns illegality sometimes too. You know, people, if it's the critter on the wall that's the most important thing, some people, I'm not saying a lot, but some people, whatever they have to do to put that trophy on the wall so they can brag about it later. And I just think that's not the right reason to trophy hunt animals with a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
The other thing that bothers me these days, to be honest, and I'm a real upbeat guy, but sometimes I watch television shows and people are shooting these monstrous animals, and then I'll talk to a kid or maybe somebody in their 40s or 50s, and they'll kind of apologize for the 130 or 135 whitetail that they shot. Say, well, one of these days I'm going to shoot a big animal. And I'm thinking any animal is a trophy animal with a bow. And don't think about big antlers as the end goal, because anything is big if you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I fell into that a little bit. I shot an elk, I think it was last year, and you know, I didn't have a lot of time to hunt, and I was holding out for a branch bull. So I had an opportunity to branch bull, and I literally made a really good shot, and so he's standing there just at the end of his road. And then out walks the big, 6-point that we're all hoping for. And all of a sudden I started doubting myself. I was like, oh man, I just should have waited. And then I started getting down a little bit. And I'm like, you know what? There's been, a lot of bow seasons I would have loved to have just had a chance at a branch bull like what I just harvested. And so you have to kind of get that mentality put in the right department. There's a place for it, but I see that a lot on social media where people are like, well, he's not a giant butt. I'm like, hey, it's a trophy to me. Should be a trophy to you.
It all depends on the circumstance, really. I've written about it before, but a few years ago, I shot a tiny 2x2 mule deer right by my house here in Wyoming. And there aren't any really big bucks in my area. They're hunted too hard. It's more of a meat factory area. And I was excited that I was gutting that deer within sight of my office. And I think I was just excited about that deer as I ever have been about one of the big mule deer you were talking about earlier. It all depends on the circumstance, and it's all personal for me.
Yeah. I had a hunt like that with a good buddy of mine, and we just happened to be out, and here's a guy who killed some nice mule deer in Oregon, and he went out and shot a fork and horn mule deer just like what you're talking about. And he says, you know what? He says, that was a lot of fun because there just wasn't this huge amount of pressure. He says, if I'd have missed, or it was just fun to do and fun to, like you say, have something on the meat pool.
And pressure is a bad thing. I can honestly say I've never felt pressure bow hunting. I'm not feeling like I have to shoot the big critter. I just want my tag in my pocket. And I love Pope and Young because it gives guidelines for what is big and what is not so big. So if I have the luxury, I'll look through a spotting scope with my binoculars and size up each side of the rack and decide if that one's big enough for me. It gives me some ground rules, but I'm not feeling any pressure to shoot an animal so I can write another story or put it in Pope and Young. That's just the aftermath of having a great time for me.
Yeah. So I've heard a number. What is the number for how many you have in Pope and Young?
Well, Jason, I was really happy last year, 2020, to break the 200 mark. And I have 203 now. And
oh my God.
I set a goal. The late, great Jim Doherty was president of the Pope and Young Club. I think it was for 16 years. And for a number of years after I got in the industry, I didn't enter anything in the book. That was not a priority for me. And Jim came to me one day and he said, how come you're not entering this stuff? You're writing about it. And I said, oh, it's just not that important to me. And he said, well, you really need to, so everybody else has something to compare with when they look in the record books. And I thought that makes a lot of sense. So I entered the few animals that I had that would make it at that point. And I set this personal goal. I said, I would like to shoot 200 Pope and Young animals in my lifetime.
Wow.
And that we're talking back in the 70s. To be honest with you, again, it's just a strictly personal goal. I never told anybody about it until I hit 200, but now I'm looking at 300. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I'm a goal-oriented sort of guy, and that's my new personal goal. I think it's possible.
Yeah, that's so my goal is going to be 3. I'm gonna get 3 in there. So, you know what, Dylan, that will make me exactly like when Chuck gets to 300 and I get to 3. That will make me exactly 1% as good as Chuck Adams. And you know what? In the bow hunting world, I can live with that.
Yeah. No, they were telling me because I was sitting there working the computer and all these awards were given, so all these award winners had to walk right by me. And I was saying, congratulations. And finally one guy said something back to me and I said, well, when they start accepting fork and horn awards, then I might get an award.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a category I might be able to dominate.
No, I got to tell a story though. So, I really didn't know how much that you influenced my bow hunting journey, Chuck, until not too long ago, really. But my dad has always been a big Chuck Adams fan, and he had you probably remember the year, but it was a Hoyt Game Getter. I think it was probably like an 86, 88, somewhere right in there. And so when I started bow hunting, that's what he said: "Here's your bow, go shoot it." And so you're talking, I don't know, 2010, and I'm shooting an 86 Hoyt. And but man, I just went out and flung arrows with it all the time. And so I took it out and shot my first deer with it. And I had no idea what was being sparked there, and it was all because of an old bow that my dad kept around because that's what Chuck Adams shot. And so the old Hoyt 86 Game Getter was my first bow that I harvested an animal with. And I wasn't even alive in 86, but that was the first bow I used.
That's cool. I started shooting the white game getter in 1984, Dylan.
There you go.
And
84.
that was the first year I shot for white, and I love that bow. I've still got that bow on the wall here, all these many years later.
You know, I went back one time, and it was probably a couple years ago, but I got that bow out of the closet and I went to shoot it, and I'm like, man alive, you're pulling back, 70 pounds, but it feels like you're holding 80 pounds back. And then it feels like a gun going off in your hand. And I thought, man alive, how far has technology come?
Absolutely. That was like a 45% let off bow that I was shooting back in the day. Things have changed for sure.
Absolutely, they have.
But you could pick that bow up and climb to your tree stand and drop a buck just like people did 35 years ago.
Yep.
It's amazing, and you see that not only with archery, but with equipment all over the hunting spectrum. Decoys and clothes, and just because there's something new doesn't mean the old stuff wouldn't still work. And it's I hear people talk about that all the time.
Yeah, I think the animals still have the upper hand no matter what your shooting equipment. Gear is more dependable and obviously faster and more powerful. And if you shoot a release aid and a short compound bow, you're going to be more accurate than you used to be with fingers. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is the critters still have the advantage.
Yeah, I know it's I for one am very happy with some of the rangefinders and pins and things like that, because when I started I didn't have that. I shot a 80-pound golden eagle, and when I started I didn't even have sights on that thing, and it was before laser rangefinders, and it was a big guessing game, and I shot the 2219 Easton arrows, not because that was what was spined for me, but because that was the heaviest, toughest arrow you could get. When you didn't have a lot of money, you needed to be able to shoot that arrow after it bounced off a rock or a stump or something. So that was I remember the arc of those things was just, it was a pretty big arc back in the day.
For sure. Well, I shot 2219s almost exclusively through the 1980s and into the early 90s, and again, that was a rugged shaft, and if you hit something, it was going to go through it too.
Yeah.
Those were awesome shafts.
Yeah, I just remember it was tough, and a lot of guys were switching to the bigger diameter, thinner walled, but man, you couldn't bounce those off a rock. So
no, for sure.
Well, what was your first arrow, Dylan?
Whatever metal arrows was with that 84 game getter. They were some kind of Eastons. I remember that. Because at that age I was still playing, baseball, and I thought, well, hey, isn't that a baseball brand? And so I remember they were Eastons, but whatever kind of, they were still the camo metal aluminum arrows. So whatever they were.
Yeah.
My first aluminum arrows were the old Easton 24 SRTX. They didn't have anodizing at that time, so every time you pull them out of the target, you get black on your hands from the oxidation. And so I set up a little spinning tool and sprayed mine with zinc chromate green primer. So for two reasons: better camouflage, and I wouldn't get my hands black all the time.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm glad that now they come where I don't have to spray paint my own arrows. I think I'm a fan of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, when they came out with hard anodizing back in the late 80s, it changed everything. You may recall the soft anodizing would wear off in the target after a while too. And so now, I mean, everything gets better and better. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. And so are you strictly traditional, or do you use a compound as well, or what's your choice now?
I've been shooting a compound for many years. When I started my career with Peterson's Hunting Magazine in LA back in the 70s, Tom Jennings was just a few miles down the road. So I visited the Jennings factory. He set me up with one of his old wood handle compound bows. And I checked the other day. I own about 30 recurves of longbows, and that's how I started. I still prefer finger shooting. I hunted with a release aid last year, and there's nothing as accurate as a release aid, but I like the simplicity of fingers. So I shot fingers with a recurve, and then I've been shooting fingers with a compound for many, many years. Can't find a good finger bow in compounds anymore. They're all too short. So I get that question a lot. If you want to keep finger shooting with a compound, you almost have to go to a used bow, one of the older ones that's at least 40 inches axle to axle.
Yeah.
You were talking about rangefinders. You probably remember the old dial operated rangefinders where you brought two images together, and if a cloud passed overhead, the calibration changed. And laser rangefinders are awesome. The laser rangefinder is one of the most significant advances, I think, in modern bow hunting.
Yeah, I have a story for that. Last year I was grouse hunting, and so it was really early in the morning, really foggy, and so I popped my rangefinder up, and it was too foggy to get a range on this grouse. I'm like, well, it's got to be about 40 yards. So I'd shoot, and I'm low, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I knock another arrow, and it's a grouse, so it just sits there, and shoot again, and it's low. And I'm like, well, that just doesn't make any sense. And I'm sitting there trying to figure it out. I'm getting another arrow ready to go, and he kind of walks over behind some brush. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I wound up walking up there looking for my arrows and found out where he was sitting. And as I ranged it back to where I was by this tree, I could get a good range on that tree, and it was 71 yards. I was like, well, that explains why I was shooting under him. But you just don't realize how dependent you get on your equipment until something like that happens.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. In the old days, I used to spend probably an hour a day practicing range estimation by eye, because when I put sights on my old recurve bow, my old wing Thunderbird that I shot for several years, I got dramatically better on targets and game if I knew the distance. So I wanted to know the distance.
Yeah.
Back in those days, it was almost a sin with some folks to put sights on your recurve bow, but my bottom line is I wanted to kill animals cleanly, and it worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember years ago, we'd shoot the 3D course. A good friend of mine, Gents, who actually talked me into getting my first compound, and we'd go to 3D courses, and our range was, you'd both get up there, and the first guy up would say, well, we both think it's about 52 yards, and then the first guy'd shoot it, and then he'd tell you, nope, it's 57. And so the second guy had a huge advantage as long as you had a buddy that was honest. So that was how we used to do range on the 3D course.
Yeah, Ranging, the old company that used to sell those dial-operated rangefinders, they always pointed out a military study that showed that the average, what they called trained observer, was off about 25% on the distance on average.
Yeah.
And as you know as well as I do, even on flat ground, it's hard. But if you get in the hills and you're looking across a ravine, or you're hunting an animal you're not used to that's bigger or smaller, it can totally mess you up.
Yeah, or uphill, downhill, and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. I've got a rangefinder binocular now that gives me an instant angle readout as well as the distance. And I mean, it takes a lot of guesswork out for sure.
Yeah. And has there been any shot, speaking of uphill, downhill, over a ravine, has there been any shot that's just kind of, that's one you just don't like, or you just haven't had good luck with?
You mean in general, or on a specific animal?
Just
in general?
Either one, in general, or if there's one that kind of sticks out in your mind that you just love to have back.
I don't, in general, I don't like the side hills that well because if your bow's not dead plumb, you're going to shoot to left or right on a side hill. Up and down, if I know the angle, I can pretty well figure that one out. But the side hills could be a little tricky. You might not hit exactly where you want to, even with a bubble on your sight. In the heat of the action, you don't always look at that bubble, and so that's a problem. The one shot that I can think of that still bugs me to this day, but it wasn't my fault. There was a white-tailed deer they called the space monster in Alberta, Canada, and he always showed up in the winter at the haystack and dropped his antlers, and he was like a 260 deer when they measured his biggest set of sheds. And they kept telling me about this deer, and the deer would go into a national park where he couldn't be hunted during gun and bow season. Well, the year that I hunted along Dinosaur National Park, that deer was getting pretty old. He was probably 8 or 9 years old. His antlers that he was dropping every year, like clockwork, weren't quite as big. They're still well over 200. And I spotted him going across the field in legal territory one day. And I set up a blind with tumbleweeds along the fence, just a couple hundred yards from the national park. And crouched down in there the next day, and I'll be darned if here he didn't come right after daylight, heading for the safe zone. And he was kind of limping, and he obviously looked old and kind of arthritic, and he had his brow tines were over 12 inches high, and he was just an awesome deer. And I drew my bow just as he jumped the fence, and he stopped, and I let go, and he turned into a yearling buck at that point, and he was probably 40 or 50 feet away from my arrow when it hit. It was like a 40, 45-yard shot.
Wow.
And he ran down into the park, and a gun hunter got him later that year because he was downhill and needed the haystacks to keep up his energy. And I don't remember exactly, but his antlers were about 230.
Wow.
And I think the brow tines ended up being about 16 inches long. Narrow but really tall deer.
Wow.
But I'll never forget that shot. Because it felt good, and I followed through, and the deer just wasn't there when the arrow hit.
They're fast.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know how fast white-tailed deer are. I mean, they're just coiled up all the time.
Yep. Yeah, I saw a video years ago where they were talking about how a deer will just duck a shot, and they said, "Here's a deer pre-shot." They drew a line on the screen, where its back was, and a line where its stomach was, and they said, "Here's the shot." And the amount of time that it took that arrow to get there, that deer dropped well below where its belly had been, and then just took off like a shot.
They crouched to load their leg muscles, and then there's no telling where they're going to go after that. And I wrote a whole long article, a blog for my website a few months ago on that very subject. And I don't care how fast your arrow flies. A white-tailed deer that hears your bow is going to beat you. You're going to have to compensate for that.
Yeah.
So, I saw a video, it might be the same video, but they were talking about a deer with his head up compared to its head down. And if its head is up, then it can drop quicker. Have you ever noticed anything like that, Chuck?
It all happened so fast, I honestly haven't. When I shoot, I'm following through the shot and trying to keep my sight on the spot on the animal where I'm shooting. So I haven't noticed that. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, they were just talking
maybe if his head's up, he's just already alert and more wired than one whose head is down. I don't know.
Well, they were just talking about how the way the body goes to load up, it doesn't have to drop its head first. It can just drop down, and they went into all that. But I was just curious to know if you had ever experienced anything like that.
So you're saying that the head up deer crouch is better or worse than the head down deer?
I don't even remember now.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't know.
I don't even remember now, because I remember thinking like, well, if a deer jumps the string, either way, it's faster than the arrow, no matter if it's head up or down. If it decides to duck your arrow, it's going to beat your arrow. So I remember just kind of writing it off, but just thinking, well, if it ducks, whether it's heads up or down before the shot. So I was just curious to know.
I don't know. I know it seems like southern deer, whitetail deer jump the string worse than northern deer. And I don't know why that is. Maybe they have less body mass, and so they can move faster. But I've hunted South Texas a number of times. I always, even at 20 yards, aim for the bottom line of the chest on a Texas deer, because they always hear something when you let go. Even if you're inside a blind, a ground blind, and if you aim for the center of the lungs, you're going to get a high lung hit, or heaven forbid, hit even higher.
So that's that's something you do. What would you say? So you're aiming 6 inches lower than where you're.
Yeah. The average white Texas whitetail has a chest cavity about 9 inches from top to bottom. So I'm probably aiming 4 to 5 inches lower than center to where I think the chest cavity is. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And quite often it's a middle or a high lung hit.
Yeah.
With that kind of hold.
Yeah. I saw something that said, no matter what animal you're hunting, where you're hunting it at, just aim at the heart, because if it doesn't duck, you hit it in the heart. And if it does duck, you hit it in the lungs. So
that's good advice. That's really good advice.
Yes. I've had some instances where, you have a successful shot, but I've had, issues where you just couldn't find any external blood whatsoever, because you hit them up a little bit high. And I think that cavity just fills, and they just don't bleed externally like you wish they would, or you'd hope they would. So I started gravitating my shots down a little bit for that, just to try to get a little bit better blood trail to aid in recovery.
I agree. That's a great strategy. And there's a lot more non-vital tissue above the lungs than below the lungs. So you just don't want to hit too high. I hear guys say, oh, I double lunged him and he got away. Well, my bet is a good percentage of the time it's not a double lung. It's up in that no man's land under the spine, or through the bottom of the spine.
Yeah.
First time I ever took my wife bow hunting with me, we were in Arkansas, and so just like Texas, smaller deer, fast and wiry, and we were sitting in a ground blind, and I had a doe come to like 8 yards, and I was like, well, I'm gonna shoot this deer, babe, get ready, and so I draw back, and within 8 yards, the deer still ducked my arrow, went right over her back. And I remember her thinking, like, she even said it. She's like, you missed. It was so close and you missed. And I'm like, well, that's just how it goes sometimes. Later that night, I couldn't find my arrow anywhere. I had a lighted knock on it, couldn't find it. It was Thanksgiving Day. And so after Thanksgiving dinner, I asked one of my cousins, I'm like, hey, you want to drive back out to me, Mom, and Papa's and look for my arrow with me? And he's like, yeah. I was like, it's dark. I've got a lighted knock. We'll see it. And sure enough, as soon as I come around the bend and you could see the whole field, I see the arrow floating in the pond, just knock up, just that lighted knock. And it was Thanksgiving, so it was freezing cold. And I was a broke college kid, so I'm like, I need all the arrows I can get. So I just got in my skivvies and swam out and grabbed my arrow and got back in the truck. But sure enough, within 8 yards, that doe ducked my arrow.
That doesn't surprise me, Dylan. I used to live in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, and residents could get extra doe tags every year with a season that ran all the way past Christmas time. And so I would go down, and there was a railroad track that bordered a wildlife refuge, and the deer would come out of the fields early in the morning and cross the track into the safe zone. So I dug some pit blinds and would hunt does down there. And I'll never forget this doe that came across just after sunrise. And she turned broadside at about, as if I memory serves me right, about 25 yards, and had a perfect shot. I shot her through both lungs, and the arrow caught the back of the shoulder blade on the far side. She ran off and dropped. And I went over there and I thought something is really weird here. And the arrow was exiting the side that I aimed at. And that doe had swapped ends 180 degrees before my arrow got there. And I still caught her through both lungs and dropped her. But it happened so fast, I didn't even know what happened.
Wow.
Their reflexes are just amazing.
Huh.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you have to understand, I've never been a real fast arrow guy, and I was probably, my arrows were probably flying under 210 feet per second back then, and I was shooting, I think it was 2317 arrows at that point, another oldie but goodie, but slow. And so that helped her a little bit, but that deer would have made some major moves even with a fast arrow.
Didn't sound like it helped her much.
No, she was pretty good on the table later.
Yeah, how that?
Chuck, I don't know if you heard, but earlier in the year, Easton actually came on as a corporate partner of Pope and Young's. So what Easton arrow are you running right now? What's your arrow setup right now?
I'm shooting full metal jackets, 300 spines with I always shoot about 75 pounds. So last year I shot the Hoyt RX4 with those 300 spine full metal jackets, G5 Striker V2 broadheads, and they work great. I like the aluminum carbon combination shafts because you get great camo on the outside. They're easy to pull out of the target. Easton can straighten them really well because of the aluminum. The aluminum takes a set, so the carbon inside couldn't be straightened by itself. It's either straight or not. But those arrows are just awesome.
Very cool. I've actually never shot the full metal jackets. I don't know why, but just never shot them.
I'll bet as a corporate, with them as a corporate sponsor, you could probably get your hands on some.
No, I'm shooting the. It just came out. It's the Easton Axis 4mm long range, and I've been really impressed with that because I loved the Axis for a long time. Shot the Axis for probably 5 years, and then they came out with the 4mm Axis, and I've loved it. It's a phenomenal flying arrow. I'm shooting it at my recurve and my compound actually.
What do you think makes the difference with that shaft?
Just a small diameter. I've been a small diameter guy for a long time, and you know, just that small diameter is not affected by wind like it normally is, and just flies really well, especially at long ranges, which is why it's called the long range. But yeah, you get out to long ranges, and that small diameter just doesn't get pushed around by wind like a thicker walled, heavier diameter arrow does.
That makes sense. I shoot the 5mm full metal jackets, and I can tell the difference between those and the old 2419s and 2317s that I once shot. It does make a difference when the breeze is blowing, particularly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I shoot the Axis, and I'm almost embarrassed to say why. It's because when they first came out, they had that wrap on the back. And I thought, man, that is a cool looking arrow. So that's what I went to. And then I switched to them. Then they got rid of it. So
the cosmetics went away, but you still like the arrow.
I stuck with it. But now we got State Wraps as one of our partners. And so I called him up, and he made me some pretty neat looking arrow wraps. So now I'm back to looking good too.
Shameless.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, shameless plug.
Yeah,
you might as well look good when you're out there shooting straight, right?
You know, yeah.
Wraps just sent us our new wraps with our new logos on them,
and they're cool,
awesome looking.
Yeah,
awesome looking.
That's you know, Chuck. not all of us have 200 animals in the book, so we've got to do everything we can to look cool.
Yeah.
Well, more power to you, buddy.
Yeah. That's if I've got pretty looking arrows, maybe they won't look at how I shoot.
It's all good, right? It's all good.
Yeah.
After it draws more attention to the way you shoot, because they're like, look at those arrows, then they watch you shoot.
That could be, because I remember years ago I went to a shotgun range, and I showed up. I was in flip flops and shorts and had a rusty old Benelli shotgun, and some guys had the pretty ones out there with me, and man, I beat them bad on a sporting clays course. And that's probably how I look at the archery range. I show up with my pretty arrows, and these other guys are just beating the tar out of me on the course. So there is justice in the world.
Well, you're shooting a quality product though too, so the potential is there, right?
I just have to realize that.
Well, you're obviously a modest man. I've heard you're a pretty darn good shot. So
everybody gets lucky sometimes. So 300 is the next number. Can we quote you on that? I think
you can quote me. I think I'm on a podcast. Everybody's gonna know. So
that's right. So what's Frank Noska think of 300? Have you asked him?
No, but Frank approached me at the archery trade show a few years ago, and I don't think he'd mind me telling you this. He said, I'd never met him before, and he said, I think I've got you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I've got 119 Pope and Youngs, and I think you've got 122, Chuck, and I've got several pending, so I think I'm ahead of you. And I kind of grinned at him and said, Frank, there's only one problem with that. I haven't entered anything in 10 years. And my old favorite Pope and Young major moved away, and I had found somebody else, and it wasn't something I'd done right away. And I'm going to get around to it. Now that you mentioned that, I'm going to get around to it earlier rather than later.
Yeah.
And so I went out the next couple of weeks. I went to Ron Najalik here in Cody, a good friend of mine who's a major, and I said, I got to catch up here. So I entered, I think it was 49 animals, and Frank's been chasing me ever since. So.
Oh yeah. I think Frank told a version of that. We had him on. We went live from panel with the podcast because he was one of our panel measures, and I think he told a version of that same story. So that's
Frank. I don't know Frank well, but he seemed like a great guy, and more power to him. He's a little younger than me, so he may catch me at some point, but I'm not going to make it easy on him.
That's good. That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, Dylan, we may have to do that. We may have to have, like every once in a while, just have a recap and have them both on.
Yeah, I like it.
So,
yeah. we could do that. Well, Frank, I don't think Frank's married yet. I heard he had a serious girlfriend now, so that may slow him down a little bit. I'm a very happily married guy, and so I don't bow hunt quite as much as I once did when I was single and lived like a coyote. But I'm still hammering it a few months a year.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I don't know if it'll slow Frank down. Here's a guy moved to Alaska just so he'd be able to hunt, kind of like you. You started bow hunting to hunt more. He moved to Alaska for more opportunities, and when you talk about his whole year, it's like a lot of us. He's all about hunting all year long. It's people that make decisions in the off season to be able to do things during the season. And
he's like a kid in a candy store in Alaska. There are more hunting opportunities up there than any place else. I fashioned my whole life around that same basic concept. Write magazine articles and do other things 8 months out of the year, 80 hours a week sometimes, so I could disappear the other 4 months out of the year and just hunt.
Yeah, no, that's it's amazing. I think he's on his third Slam. He's done it twice, and he's on his third round of the 29.
4 animals away for the third round.
Wow.
Oh yeah. I talked to him every fish the second one, and that's an amazing accomplishment.
I can't even imagine what it would take to do that. I can't imagine what it would take to do that with a rifle, let alone do it with a bow. I mean,
well, the awesome thing about the Super Slam is that you get such great variety in bow hunting experiences. I mean, there's only a handful of animals on our continent that could be reliably hunted out of a stand. So most of it's foot hunting, and the variety of terrain and the variety of the animal habits, that's worthwhile right there.
What's been your favorite animal to chase?
My favorite animal, Dylan, is elk. If I had to hunt one animal the rest of my life, it'd be elk. It'd be nice if I could get like 5 tags a year, but I mean, elk are they're not the spookiest animals, but they're just awesomely big, and they make all kinds of neat noise during the rut. And you can't beat an elk on the table after you get him. I just love the variety of antlers. You see an elk, they're like all antlered animals. Every set is a work of art, and it can't be duplicated. They're all different. So I love elk.
Jason asked me that loaded question the other day, if you could only hunt one animal the rest of your life. And I said, well, that question kind of sucks because, I'm here in Kansas. So really all I've got is whitetail, because I'm not even in Western Kansas. I'm like, really all I've got is whitetail. So if I say anything other than whitetail, I don't get to hunt a lot because I got to travel for it. I said, so I'm just going to say mammals. I said,
there you go.
One thing the rest of my life would be mammals.
Well, there's not a variety animal in North America that isn't worthwhile for one reason or another.
Absolutely.
One of my all-time favorites is fair chase bison, as I'm sure you know. And I had the good fortune last year to shoot the third biggest one ever entered in Pope and Young, and it's the Wyoming state record. And it took me 9 days of snow tracking in a wilderness area, and before I got a shot at that buffalo. I'd seen him before. It was 6 below zero, and wow. When I shot him, and there was nothing I've ever done that was more challenging than that hunt. So every critter's valuable for one reason or another.
Yeah, we honored that bison last week at convention.
Yep.
Yes, you did. I wish I'd been there.
We did.
Yeah.
And that's so. Elk would be your favorite. Is there one that's just kind of your nemesis that's just not quite worked out like you'd hoped?
Squirrels.
Actually, no. I when I set my mind to going after a critter, I just keep after it until it happens. Next to elk, I love big deer, and I don't care if it's whitetail or mule deer or blacktail. I love big deer. There have been individual nemesis like the space monster whitetail I was telling you about that I didn't get. I tend to really remember the critters that got away. And the biggest Sitka deer I ever saw in my life, I never did get a shot at. I had to leave actually to go on a caribou hunt with some of the folks at Easton back in the 90s. And I hunted that deer for 3 or 4 days and had to fly out to go on this other hunt. I'll never forget how that deer looked because I think it was probably a new world record Sitka deer. Wow. And I did manage to break the world record back in the 80s on Sitka deer, and this deer was substantially bigger. Huh. So yeah, I remember the biggest elk I've ever seen was not my former world record elk. I saw one in Montana that I think would beat that 409 plus bull by a few inches. And he had 30 or 40 cows with him all the time. I never could get a shot.
Wow. That's, hey, Dylan, imagine when we're sitting here and we've got a 409 bull saying, yeah, I've seen them bigger.
Yeah.
Only one. Only one. Those critters don't come around very often.
No, I think I've only ever seen one elk that I think would go 400 inches. And when that one came across, I mean, he ran across after some cows, and he just ran out there and stood about 90 yards and just looked around, and it was just an amazing I mean, I can still see it. And you look at that thing and it's like, holy smokes, what does that thing eat? Mule deer? I mean, it was another level that I'd never seen anything like it. And that was actually in Northern California.
Was it?
Oh, it was, yeah, up in that Modoc.
Mm-hmm.
But
those critters in California get they're protected, and some of them get really big.
Yeah. It's
sure.
worse if you had to pick one place to hunt, where would it be?
Boy, one place to hunt. Well, I'm kind of with Frank, not Alaska. I like Alaska.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I'm leaving for Alaska in 9 days. My two best hunting buddies, neither one of them can go with me, so I'm going up there a month by myself to backpack for
free.
I'm sorry?
Me and Jason are both free next month. Weird. We're both free.
Hey, convention's over, literally free.
Yeah, my wife Greta was telling me the other day, she said, you wouldn't have any trouble finding somebody to go with. But
you wouldn't.
I only hunt with good friends that I have been around a lot, you know.
That's why we can't go, Jason. That's why we can't go.
Not yet.
Well, not yet. We can work on it. We can definitely work on it. But I'll be up there I get 3 Sitka deer tags and a couple of caribou tags, and it's just an awesome place to hunt. Second best, I live in Wyoming, but I would say second best would be Montana.
Okay.
But it's so hard to draw tags anymore. I used to be able to hunt elk up there every year, and it's like so far it's been about 1 in 4 years that I'll draw an elk tag anymore. So I can't hang all my hopes on Montana anymore.
Yeah. So you just need to rotate your friends with whoever has the enough preference points.
There you go. I know a couple of guys who do that, and it works out. Do you have preference points in Montana? There,
no, not yet, but I will next year.
It's like those guys, Jason. I'm sure being a waterfowl guy, you know those guys. You never hear from them until it's duck season. Then they text you and start calling you.
Yeah,
because it's duck season now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a little bit easier to take people out when you're duck hunting, because you can have 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 people with really good opportunities in a field or on the marsh. But that's a little tougher to do when you're bow hunting.
Yeah,
especially if you go for a month and you're backpacking out of the same camp, and if you're not both really independent and have personalities that mesh, it could get a little grim.
Yeah. Heck, there's some people I wouldn't want to drive to the airport with, let alone spend a month with.
We probably know some of the same folks.
I got on the airport. I got on a plane, just 2 days ago, coming back from Mountain Archery Fest, and I find my seat, and this guy was like, "Hey, would you mind trading seats?" And I thought he meant with him. Thought he meant he wanted an aisle seat. And I'm like, "Yeah, no problem." And he said, "Yeah, okay, well, my wife's just right up there. Would you switch with her?" And I'm like, "Man, if I have to fly with my wife, usually I'm looking for somebody to switch her seat so I don't have to sit by her." And he chuckled and said, "Yeah, well, we've been on vacation for a week, and she's not talking to me yet." So.
Yeah, I hear you. The Canada closures really messed things up as far as tag draws. I thought I'd draw the Montana elk tag this year. I didn't even get an archery only antelope tag in Montana. It's the first time in like 25 years. Because I think I can say it's the Canada closure. Everybody's putting in for 48 states now. So
yeah. I'm super excited. I get to go here, just in a couple weeks. I'm going to Wyoming for my first hunt there. And really excited about it. So
more Boone and Crockett, I don't know about Pope and Young, but more Boone and Crockett antelope have been shot in Wyoming than any other state.
Okay.
You hear about Arizona and New Mexico, and they are a skosh bigger, but there's more Boone and Crockett goats running around this state than any place.
Well, I've been watching every video and looking at every picture I can on how to field judge those things. And buddy that I went hunting with last year on an antelope hunt, and he said, all right, for the first 2 days we're going to put the mittens on. He says you can't shoot anything for 2 days, because he and he was right. Put the mittens on, and then find the one you want and settle in on that. And so I think that's going to be the hardest part of this for me, is to make sure that I don't say, oh yeah, that's a good one, and then you get him on the ground and say, well, okay, he's not quite as big as I thought. But
of course, what's going to happen. The biggest one will come in the first day.
Yeah. Chuck, you can probably speak better to this than even me, but in my opinion, bears are one of the hardest things to field judge. And on my first bear hunt, I just like Jason said, I was looking up how to field judge videos and pictures, and so this bear comes in and I shoot it, and the guide comes back to pick me up, and I'm like, dude, I shot a giant, big. I thought it was a new world record. I'm like, it's a giant bear. We roll up on. He's like, that's a great 200-pound bear, man. But of course, I was still over the moon with it as my first bear, but just incredibly hard to field judge.
They are. They're like pigs. They just get bigger in proportion, and if you don't have something to compare with,
right?
I'm sure you can look at the muscle mounds on the top of the head and get a little bit of an idea, and you can tell by body language if it's a big boar a lot of times. But the best thing is to have a mark on a tree, or if he covers up the bait barrel, you got a big one. That's about all you can do.
Yep.
Yeah. See, now that's a problem. In Oregon, we can't bait. So if he covers up the bait barrel, you got to let him go.
Got a bigger problem, huh?
Yeah. That's something about fair chase.
California didn't allow baiting either. And so I used to hunt with a friend when I was in college who had hounds. You could run them with hounds. They closed that season too, but you could not tell how big a bear was in a tree. All you could do is look at the footprints going to the tree. Then you get a pretty good idea.
Yeah. I never got to hunt bears with hounds, but I got to do, back in college, we tracked them with hounds, treat them, and then darted them and collared them. And that was pretty neat experience. But
sure. It wasn't my favorite way to hunt, but hunting's hunting, and I had a friend who had a great pack of hounds, so we went out quite a bit and saw a lot of bears in a tree. I think I only shot 2 out of a tree over all those years, but I saw quite a few in trees.
Yeah. So, Chuck, one of the things that we do on this show with every guest is we ask.
I'm excited for this one.
The one question, and that question is, when you're out on the mountain in the woods, what is the one item that you take with you, kind of maybe a non-traditional item that you have in your pack?
The green beanie doesn't count. We can't say the green beanie. We all know that one.
I can't say green beanie, huh?
Hey, Dylan, it's Chuck Adams, man. He can say anything he wants.
Say anything you want.
I can't say toilet paper because that's pretty standard. Boy, oh boy. I hunt pretty bare bones. I have very, very few things. I usually hunt with a fanny pack, and I've got my knife and my survival gear and a little bit of surveyor's tape to mark blood trails and things like that. I don't think I carry anything that's really non-traditional. I cut it down to a bare minimum because I don't like carrying that extra weight.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like my old friend Dwight Shue was when I'm out there. If I put fuel in the furnace, that's all I care about. So I'm usually carrying trail mix, and even if I'm out for 4 or 5 days bivouacking, I've got a big bag of trail mix with me. But
trail mix it is.
Yeah, I get maybe trail mix. I don't know. That's not that uncommon either. But
can we put him down for trail mix and flagging tape?
Yeah,
I think that's I always have flagging tape with me, but that hasn't been mentioned yet. So maybe that's a good one to
Now,
put
the
on
ultimate
list.
answer is the green beanie. The only reason I said you couldn't say it is because everybody's already aware of that one. Everybody knows you have your green beanie.
That's true. I always have that. Sometimes it's too hot and I'll take it off. But when I shoot fingers, which I still enjoy doing, I draw the bowstring too close to my forehead to wear a baseball cap. I have to turn it around backwards to shoot if I do that. So that's one reason I started wearing a stocking cap years ago. No interference with the bowstring.
I'm apparently haven't gotten to that level yet because I don't know if my hat's touching, I might even not notice it.
Is that right? Yeah. One thing I guess I could mention that until the rangefinder binoculars with angle meters in them came out, for like 35 years, I carried a clinometer with me, an angle, a palm-sized, real high-quality angle meter that often used by timber cruisers to judge the board feet in a tree by the height, figure out the height of the tree. And I worked out a fairly simple formula, mathematical formula. If I knew the distance and I knew the angle with that clinometer, I could calculate in a few seconds how much lower I needed to hold on like a downhill shot or an uphill shot. And I only quit carrying that clinometer 3 years ago when I found a rangefinder binocular that I really liked with the angle component inside.
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody else in the industry or outside the industry that ever carried a clinometer on their belt. So
that's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say, all of these rangefinder binoculars and separate rangefinders say they've got a calculation for the good ones for compensation uphill and downhill called an arc feature. But with a lot of bows, the arc feature doesn't work. You need to hold lower than normal because of the downward pressure of the arrow on the arrow rest at different angles. And the fact that the balance point of the arrow changes when you're aiming up or down, and that affects point of impact. It's different than a gun. And so if I go to that arc feature with my setups, I'm going to hit over the top of animals every time. So my little formula works better for me.
Well, clear with 200 in the book, clearly something's working for you, or everything's working for you.
Well, I'm having fun. That's the important thing.
That is. Well, I'll tell you what, Chuck, it's been a pure privilege to have you on today, and we appreciate everything you do in support of the club and bow hunting, and the true ambassador that you are to the sport. So,
well, thank you, Jason, and it's been a pleasure talking to you and Dylan today, and let's do it again sometime.
Let's do it.
Maybe with Frank Noska.
We can make that happen. So
yeah, that he's one of the few guys I think that I can think of that would just have a blast doing it together.
Oh yeah. He's a lot of fun, and he's a good guy. So, but
for sure.
Hey Dylan, after I go call my dad and tell him I just did a podcast with Chuck Adams, then we'll have to schedule that Frank Noska episode. So, hey Chuck, thanks so much. Have a great day, and look forward to celebrating that 300 with you.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to be hammering away at it the next few years.
Excellent.